Hi, good day, everybody. My name is Moshe Friedman, and this is going to be our first podcast for the Living Wells folk rap album. One of the things that we're trying to do is to be able to deliver you the depth and the wisdom behind the music. So we have with ourselves today an inspiration for some of my music. This is the esteemed Rabbi Doniel Katz.
I'm the esteemed Rabbi Doniel Katz. The usual Doniel Katz couldn't make it, so I'll be taking his place.
That's right. Esquire, actually.
Please, I appreciate it.
Rabbi Katz here is with me to discuss some of the themes in our song called the Manifesto, in which he actually is featured. And the themes of the Manifesto are this relationship between art and the content that it's meant to deliver, or maybe it's not.
Assuming it's meant to deliver content.
That's right. And one of the personal explorations in my music is to be able to understand what is the balance between music, between the art form that I use, and the words, the meaning, the content that I'm trying to deliver. And the first question that I'd like to ask you is, can we even say that art has a function? Is that even a
That's
statement?
a real question?
That is, I think so.
Okay.
I think that's a real question.
Are some people troubled by that, or would it play a theoretical game?
I think I've certainly encountered skeptics out there who says, wait a minute, who says that you can say art is supposed to mean something or supposed to do something?
Maybe something that is arts gratis artis, which is the idea that art for art's sake, that art should not convey a deeper meaning.
Yes.
So that's something we know from the Greeks.
Right.
So is that what we're referring, or we're just talking about highly emotionally blocked individuals that are just like questioning the whole thing in the first place?
Let's give people the benefit of the doubt.
That's always a nice thing to do. Okay.
And we'll say that there are some people who theoretically, philosophically believe that art is not supposed to do anything.
Mm-hmm. It's probably the dominant opinion in the world today. Probably with modern music or modern cinema. The meaning is a bonus after the content and the excitement and the adrenaline rush, etc., etc. Okay,
so how can we assume? Can we assume? From where do we know that art is supposed to have a function?
So even the question itself is trying to put meaning back where meaning may have been forgotten, which is kind of the dialogue, I guess. Torah's perspective, the ancient Jewish mystical tradition on this is the concept of beauty, the concept of aesthetic has great meaning. That everything in this world is a duality, whether it's mind and body, whether it's soul and person, whether it's masculine and feminine, whether it's head and heart. There's always a duality, where it's also called heaven and earth, where there's spiritual meaning, there's spiritual insight, there's wisdom, and the wisdom has to be framed, packaged in a way that engages the heart, which engages the feminine aspect. That's called the embodiment aspect. In the mystics call it Tzur and Chomer. Right, which is the idea that there's an abstract concept and there's the way that it's expressed in the world.
So you're saying basically that the nature of the world is built such that every form, everything that is a clothing, so to speak, is meant to be imbued with some sort of meaning.
From a part of our wisdom tradition, that's absolutely so. The physicality is not, I think the idea is more existential once you kind of take off the shell of it and see the root. Is the physical world, all physical pleasure, meant to be an end in itself? Is intimacy between a man and a woman just, as this arts gratis artist, can we say, is it intimacy for the sake of intimacy? Or is it supposed to express a love, a deeper connection, a spiritual bond? Do I eat food for the sake because it's yummy and delicious? Or am I eating food, the initial element is because it's actually healthy and nutritious. Right. And that all deeply, transforms the eating experience, and that there's great spiritual intent and meditations that are also done as well. So but both of them are necessary. The Torah is a very profound path, which both of them are relevant, both of them are necessary. The Torah talks about the value of beauty, the value of aesthetics. Our sages discuss in the Talmud that the Beis Hamikdash, the temple, was one of the most beautiful things in the world. And the mystics go to town on who cares? It's one of the most meaningful places in the world. It's the most spiritually potent places in the world. Who cares it was beautiful? So what does it
matter if it's beautiful?
So the answer is because we're always looking for the harmony, the symmetry, the synthesis between the marriage, the intimacy between the insight, revelation, wisdom, and how that comes to create a home and a vessel in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And in an ideal, perfected world, the final world of revelation we expect to see soon in this world, is that there will not be a distinction, a division between aesthetic, between beauty, between art, and between meaning. They will live in harmony. That means the most beautiful things will be the most meaningful things, and the most meaningful things automatically will be beautiful.
Right. I would imagine that a lot of people, a lot of people would subscribe to this notion that the art, the clothing exists for its own sake, because there's something almost free about that. That if I can sit in the movie and not have to learn something and not have to use my mind or let it change me in some way, but I can just enjoy the eye candy, then somehow that would provide me with this free sense of pleasure.
We'd have to define the word freedom, wouldn't we? Because there's two senses of freedom. The sages discuss two forms of freedom. There's the freedom of the body, which is free from the soul, which means I'm free to pursue pleasure and desire at all costs without consequence. And that's a freedom that ends in bondage, ends in slavery of self, slavery of identity, that I lose myself and forget myself. Then there's a higher level of freedom. And the higher level of freedom is sometimes I'm bound, I'm limited, but ultimately disciplined. If I learn a musical instrument for 20 years, it's all about difficulty and struggle.
Right.
But after a while, I can express and reveal a higher soul, a higher purpose.
Without the scales, you can't be Mozart.
There you go. Yeah. That's right. So on a more fundamental level, that freedom, we want to be, the more base level a person is holding at in their own spiritual development. I want the pleasure of aesthetic. I want the pleasure of desire without the meaning, without the consequence. But the more sophisticated you get, you realize that when you lose the meaning and consequence, you lose the revelation, you lose the higher feeling of transcendence.
Right. I was going to say, couldn't you also say that you lose an incredible deal of pleasure?
So it's the levels of pleasure. There are many teachings of this that we know, right? That the most sophisticated connoisseur of spiritual development realizes there's a hierarchy of pleasure. Physical pleasure is awesome. Physical pleasure is wonderful, but emotional pleasure is much more powerful than physical pleasure. You overcome. I want to give my wife some food. There's only one piece of food left on the plate, and I will give that to my wife rather than take that for myself on a good day. Right? Why is that? Because the feeling of love and caring is much more potent for me than just the desire to fit in my mouth. And then meaningful pleasure, I do something because it's right, even though there's physical consequence. And then spiritual pleasure, spirituality has a pleasure. There's a bliss, there's a tanug eloki, when a person's in a deep meditational state or transformative state. And when you taste that, then you don't want to just compromise for the low level aesthetic, for the beauty. You want the spirituality, and the highest level is the balance of all the systems, that you get the physical pleasure bound with the spiritual consciousness. Yeah. And that's the greatest moment of revelation and connection.
Okay, beautiful. So basically what we're saying is that that it's almost built into the system. It's almost self-evident that we want there to exist a marriage of form and content.
It's self-evident when your eyes are opened, when you have awakened. Until then, we are more likely to be enslaved to the physical aesthetic rather than the spiritual aesthetic. If we can call something sophisticated as a hashtag spiritual aesthetic, and you have to meditate what that means. I think you and I have discussed this before. Do you find your meaning in beauty or beauty in meaning?
Yeah.
And that's something we have to meditate on. That itself is a great litmus test for where a person's up to in the development of their own consciousness.
Amazing. So what I'd like to ask you, Rabbi Katz, you have put forth a lot of your own, I would say some of them are original ideas and also ancient ideas that you have kind of rebranded and repackaged in order to serve today's modern generation. Rabbi Katz's growingly popular seminars can be found at elevationproject.global.
That's correct.
Where Rabbi Katz teaches methods, practices, techniques, and also the theory behind elevating one's consciousness in a very, very easily understood way.
Sounds like a good program. I should check it out. Let me write that down.
That's right.
Yes.
I get commission.
Good. Take whatever you want, buddy.
So what I'd like to ask you is that you also have had a background in film. I know that in Australia you worked extensively and studied a lot of film.
I used to be a film director and an actor and everything I could be. An auteur was the fancy term for it back in the day.
There you go. So my question for you is: have you ever employed the techniques and the theory that you studied in your film days in order to put forth your ideas that you have today?
That is an ongoing discussion in my head and my heart about what to do. When I was not born religious, I'm not quite sure if I'm religious now, but whatever that means. You're shocked. Should we take a break? Pause the video for a second. So for me, the path on to become more connected with my own heritage and the mystical Kabbalistic exploration of halacha, the Jewish legal code and the meaning of that was a very transformative period. But that period was almost a divorce from my previous life. I was an up-and-coming director and I won some awards and I was doing fancy things in the newspapers and made these short films. And then you kind of leave that behind, and then you go into this world of text and ancient tradition and teachers, and you're sitting in Jerusalem for many years. And the first stage is a divorce, but then the second stage is like kind of integration, which is, but a large part of me was there, and more than a large part of me being there, a good part of me was there. There was a creative, connected, open, magical part of the self, which is not supposed to be, it's one thing, we don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. We're trying to develop a higher self, but it has to be an integrated self. So the question was always, now do I go back to being religious and Jewish and a filmmaker? Because I have talents there, gifts, skills, abilities, know-how, insight. I have a contribution there. And that was a bit of a battle for a while, like how should I take it? And when I realized my big insight, which was, speaking of freedom, which is quite liberating, was what I call literal translation and lateral translation. That means, if you will...
What does that mean?
I'm glad you asked, Moshe. Here's my little Torah on that. Literal translation means I used to be a filmmaker, and now I'm in a different place in the world, a different time in my life. My skill set is being a filmmaker, therefore I'm only going to have meaning, and all my outlets are always going to be about filmmaking. That's a literal translation. Now I'm going to be a Jewish religious filmmaker, right? And that's great. Not that there's anything wrong with that, right?
Not that there's anything wrong with
that. Right, but then there's another explanation, which is...
For example,
yes,
a religious Jewish rapper.
Right, not that there's anything wrong with that.
That would be a literal...
That's a literal translation, which is totally good. But I also found that when I wanted to be a filmmaker, there's also part of me that felt trapped. There's part of me that wanted to give deep messages. There's part of me that didn't want... I always thought a problem with being a filmmaker is you spend like 2 years fundraising, writing, designing, building, editing, post, special effects, and then you get 90 minutes with the audience at the end. That's not such a great ratio for impact when you think about it.
Right.
So I was kind of wanted to reach...
Well, there's DVD sales.
There is now. Okay, so back to being a filmmaker.
Right.
Thanks for giving me that context and perspective. So what I felt was really profound is that I wanted to reach through the screen and take the audience on a journey. And I wanted to open them to ideas, but then keep developing them. And now I kind of see a rabbi who is quite repressed in a filmmaker box. So lateral translation means there's so many skills that you use as a great filmmaker that can be used in many different ways. Rather than taking the body, a filmmaker means that I have to have a camera in my hand, right? You can take the soul. You're a storyteller. You understand how to impact people, how to build up an idea. The 3-act structure is a very profound tool to understand life, consciousness, history. It's a very profound tool to understand how to create a very powerful class. We run 4, 5, 6-day workshops, right? Self-development seminars, and I can structure them with the same sensitivities as a film script, how it builds, how it twists, how it turns. There's so many skills, the understanding of aesthetic, the understanding of engaging a person's mind and heart in different dynamics. There's so many laterally, the soul of filmmaking is more evocative and is more freeing because there's many things I can do. So what I actually find, people say to me today, are you still fulfilled when you're no longer a filmmaker? The truth is, I let the filmmaking talents kind of out of the box and I'm much more fulfilled because I haven't defined the creativity and the skill set that it took to make a film as only holding a camera. Now I feel as an educator, you have the whole world as a campus.
Right. And it's very clear that your teaching style is extremely visual. And you are...
What does that mean?
What does that mean?
Yes, I'm not doubting. I'm interested to...
It means that, for example, when you're trying to convey an idea, so as you've mentioned in the past, you like to start with a story. And the story is not just a, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. It's there is imagery. It's rife with imagery.
Right. Well, that's a way to bring people's head and hearts into the space. Frankly, when I hear rabbis telling stories, I usually get bored because I'm like, okay, now we're going to do a story in the shtick. Yeah. So that's also to know how to take a person's expectations and twist it and turn it, and how to engage them in different ways. So for me, that's all part of good education. Mm-hmm. Being a filmmaker is a part of understanding how to build and develop and take people on a journey. How to, the concept of juxtaposition cinematically with editing. Sergei Eisenstein, one of the greatest editors, has all these powerful things about juxtaposition of a shot, how every cut has to open up, expand the audience perception. So by taking different ideas in the world, and one of the ideas, you can create profound juxtapositions. And I sense as I'm doing in real time as an educational model, wow, I'm using that understanding. Once you learn the Kabbalah and Hasidus, I find a lot that things that you learned in a limited section of your life, they suddenly open up. The concept of rap music today is a very profound thing in the fact that you're taking a cultural phenomenon that coming out kind of African American kind of culture rising up America, and it's being used with political insights today and different things. But it's all the idea of sampling itself.
That's right.
It's an idea of being able to take lots of different influences, like a very postmodern feeling, lots of different dimensions and influences and cultural influences, and kind of run them together in a very profound way when they become more than the sum of their parts. And that's a feeling of all great art, is that look at like we're talking Hamilton, right? So many different cultural references and historical elements brought together. It's everything in it is old. We've seen rap music before, we know the history lesson before, we've seen the musical before, but somehow they come together and there's something new and fresh there.
That's right. And as you mentioned, this idea of juxtaposition creates an unbelievable, dynamic, powerful punch. Because I think for me, that's what resonated so much with rap music, is that first of all, you're able to squeeze in so many words that it actually really lends itself
to ideas
more than other music. But the other idea is that because of the rhythm, the ability to deliver a punchline is so poignant, is so effective, because there's the building up of expectation, either meeting it or not meeting it.
Right.
Exactly as you said in terms of juxtaposition.
Right.
I just want to go back to something that you mentioned before, which is that part of a lot of what you've taken as a filmmaker is the ability to grab people's hearts in order to affect their mind. And that sounds like something that is a very obvious way to use beauty, to use art, to be able to open people up before you even begin with the deeper content. Is that something?
Even when you describe part of me, the cynical part of me knows that could be used in a highly manipulative way. I want to trigger your emotions, right? And then I want to slam you with my religious dogma, and I want to do that.
It could be manipulative.
It could be, and we see, but all of Western media and advertising is based exactly on those models and systems. It's all a mechanism of psychology. It's all if we create certain emotional awakenings within you for desire, for beliefs, then we can tag our brand onto that, and you'll be a sucker and basically buy it, whether you know it or not. You can even be aware of what it's doing, it still has the effect. The flip side is, in this generation in particular, we are highly holistic and highly experiential learners, which means when we access information, we neither can nor do we want to only access it only intellectually. We want to engage with it. We want it once was Generation X. We've gone to the Y and the Z, whatever we're up to, Z squared or whatever we're up to today. But at the end of the day, we're still all an aspect of Generation X. We want holistic learning. We want to be affected emotionally, intellectually. We're quite a sophisticated generation. So for me, any education that begins like Torah, here's a beginning, middle, and end in my head, and here's a valuable, abstract, intellectual piece of information, is not really enough.
Right.
It's to some degree not in the religious world and not in the secular world.
And is that ideal? Meaning, should it not be enough?
That
should we all be striving to just be floating brains who don't need the artwork?
Yes, we should. Yes, we should.
That's what I thought.
That's why you're learning Talmud all day and certainly not making rap music. Well, it's a very interesting thing. Do you know Freud never listened to music?
I did not know that.
Well, now you do. It's interesting what you learn from a rabbi, isn't it?
Yeah.
Freud didn't listen to music because he wanted to be totally intellectual, not at all stimulated and therefore swayed by his emotions. Uh-huh. So it's now, whether you think that's right or wrong, I personally hold it's wrong. I'm sure he was a perfectly nice Jewish boy. I've got nothing against Freud. Some of my best friends are Freud. But I don't know what that means either. But what are the...
He had multiple personalities. Yes. Some of your best friends are...
It looks like I have the multiple personalities. I should probably see Freud about that. Not that I think he would help. So what's interesting, anyway, what's interesting in that is there is a whole philosophy that the only way forward to intellectual mastery is to not bring up emotions and not to be emotionally swayed and to stay completely in the abstract, safe place of my head. But all of Chassidus and all of Musa and all of our tradition says if you try and do that, you will be in denial, because whether you like it or not, you have an emotional world, you have a physical world, and it's there humming below the surface. And the second a person says, I will not be swayed by that, you already are in denial and you're already going to be swayed by that. So all the great teachings of our tradition all say, Hashem wants your heart. And you have to develop that, you have to open that, you have to elevate that.
Right.
That's what we call the elevation project, elevation, because it means to elevate the heart, to elevate the animal self, and to show that that itself has a place for spirituality. So with that in mind, in some sense, the intellectual capacity of our generation has dropped. We can no longer study things in an abstract intellectual place, which is sad, right? And we are easily swayed and distracted by emotional stimulus. And that's the downside of the generation. But the mystics and the Kabbalists for 2,000 years from the Zohar and after all say that's a secret positive to the generation. Because it's going to seem our weakness is we are not intellectually strong, and we easily pursue our desires and we're easily distracted. But that's hiding a secret. It's a clipper con milipri. That means the peel comes before the fruit. Hidden within that is that we have a generation of very powerful heart and very powerful levels of non-intellectual consciousness. And if we leverage that in the right way, and we learn how to master that in the right way, then we can actually go higher and deeper than many previous generations.
So let me ask you, because it seems like we are a generation that is much more distracted and caught up with the externals. And yet, as you say, there's potential there to be able to turn that into something extremely powerful, maybe even more powerful than in previous generations. The question is, how do we make that flip? How are we able to take what some would perceive as a weakness, what some people say, we have no attention span and we're so constantly distracted by YouTube and we're so constantly just following the next pop culture trend. How do we take that and say, wait a minute, let me use that power and be able to turn it into something good? What would that look like?
You cannot use your power as long as your power is using you. That's a great line. I'm going to
Well
say that
said,
again.
yeah.
Put that in a website one day. You cannot use your power as long as your power is using you. Right? If you want to, people like to say, I've been, come to Jerusalem and working myself spiritually, following a Torah path and self-development. Now I'm going to get out there on the internet and I'm going to raise the sparks. I'm going to do spiritual things on Facebook, etc. So I say to people, as long as Facebook's using you, you can't use Facebook. Right? As long as you're addicted to filmmaking, you can't make a more meaningful film. When I got into some big prize that I won 1,000 years ago in the same body, and I would have been perhaps the youngest person ever to get into the top film school in Australia called the AFTOS. And I went for this kind of 2-week excursion to work on student films and get to know the staff, etc. And then in theory, I may have had the invitation to go join. And I ran out of there screaming, even though not actually running and actually screaming. Right? That was me running down the street. But I totally didn't want anything to do with it after. My teachers were devastated. Like, you made the film, you won the award, you got the invitation. Are you out of your cotton-picking mind, so to speak? And my response was that in that place, all the filmmakers and all their student films, what was this film about? Oh, it's a homage to Scorsese. It's a homage to Star Wars. It's a homage. And what I realized is that all their films were referencing other films. Because as a filmmaker, what do? You study film and you look at films. And therefore, when you find a story to tell, right, what's the story going to be? It's always going to be referencing other films. Right. But to use the medium, you have to be not living film, not living Hollywood.
You're outside of it.
You're living life in a profound degree, and then you come back and access the medium and channel that message home. So the first step is this generation has profound spiritual powers, unlike the previous generation. Can show you that in many different streams of ancient Torah traditions. The generation has to be willing to take responsibility for itself. We have to be willing.
Oh, sorry, you're just.
It'll take us a couple of weeks to pull that up.
Asking a lot,
right? So
responsibility. We don't even know how to do our laundry.
Well, hopefully your songs will raise them up to a couple of degrees.
That's
so
right.
They can
check out the next
laundry.
album for doing your laundry. That's the first track.
That's the first step to the spiritual responsibility. Good luck with that. So what that means is every individual needs to be able to say, needs to be deeply real with myself. My name is John and I'm a Facebook addict. my name is Jod, and I can't get myself to bed at night because I'm online, right? And we have to start going through those things. We have to start going, I want to go deeper. I want that meaning. I don't want to waste hours in my day and weeks of my months and months of my year lost in social media, lost in distractions, right? Because that sense of yearning, of inner depth that we sense that there's something fantastic in us, and there's something incredible happening in the generation. It's a moral generation, it's a global generation, it's a socially active generation, as in a conscious generation of consciousness, but we're still lost in the media, we're still lost in ourselves. When we have an inner desire to really crash beyond it, and everyone has to reach that critical point in their life, then we have to be able to turn everything off and learn literally, and then learn how to turn our souls and our minds off and begin to master ourselves. And that skill sets that we can learn, it's self-transformational tools we can access. And then when we can bring ourselves to that level, it won't all happen at once, but it happens in pockets, it happens in groups, it happens with individuals. Here in Jerusalem, I see in the seminar all around the world, people come in and they're yearning to take their lives to the next level. They feel caught by their emotional stuff, their baggage, their lifestyle, the stress of life, keeping up and making money, getting that car, that house, etc. These are cliches, but they're true. They're really, people are really struggling with them. And when they say, I want to crack the code of myself, then something cosmic does happen, an awakening does occur. And if you have a critical mass of those individuals, it turns it around. But a person begins to be able to say, it has to start with myself.
Wow.
I'm going to breathe now.
Yeah. I think that's a profound statement, a profound message. It's probably something...
The breathing part?
The breathing part and everything else you said before that.
Okay, before I was breathing, yes.
So I think that the conclusion here is that somehow, some way, maybe beginning with something, maybe not everything all at once, but taking some medium, something that we find ourselves living inside of, as opposed to being able to put into our story instead of living in their story. There has to be some moment of just cutting ties briefly, temporarily, in order to get myself back, in order to get that recognition back. And then
in some worlds we call that meditation. In some worlds we call that taking time out to pray. In some worlds we call that stopping for Shabbos for 24 hours.
Right.
People have different ways to do it, but we need to do it. We need to commit to it. We need to be strong in it. And worlds open from that place.
And then supposedly after that, then we can all become Jewish religious rappers.
Amen.
Great. Thank you so much, Rabbi Doniel Katz. You can check out his work, his project, his global movement at the elevationproject.global. You can also check out the Living Wells music at thelivingwells.com.
I will. And thank you for doing what you're doing. Hey. It's an inspiration to see creativity and initiative and many diverse talents. You're writing, directing, producing, designing the album, operating the entire camera.
Maybe that wasn't by choice, I don't know, but...
It's by choice of someone.
That's right.
And it's beautiful to see diverse, colorful neshamas, souls doing wonderful things in the world.
Thank you so much. And as always, the ideas that are expressed in our music, you can often find links to them below. You'll be able to find a link to some of Rabbi Katz's audio classes down below if you go below in the YouTube information, and hopefully we'll have a chance to do this again on the next album.
Looking forward to it. Take care, my friend.
Thank you.
Over and out.